Have you ever wondered how a global movement can spring from a small group of believers in rural New England? Today, we're diving into the fascinating and often surprising history of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, tracing its roots back to the turbulent religious landscape of 19th century America. It's a story of prophecy, disappointment, and the forging of a unique identity. Our story begins in the early 1800s, a period known as the Second Great Awakening. This was a time of intense religious revival across the United States. Camp meetings, passionate preachers, and a renewed interest in biblical prophecy were sweeping the nation. People were asking big questions about the end of the world and the second coming of Jesus Christ. Into this fervent environment stepped a man named William Miller, a farmer and self-taught Bible student from upstate New York. After years of meticulous study, Miller came to a startling conclusion. By interpreting the prophecy in Daniel 8:14, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed, he believed he had pinpointed the exact year of Christ's return. He calculated that this momentous event would occur sometime between March 1843 and March 1844. At first, Miller was hesitant to share his findings. He was a humble man, not a trained theologian. But the conviction grew, and in 1831 he began to preach. His message was powerful and direct, and it resonated with thousands. People from various denominations, Baptists, Methodists, and more, captivated by the idea that they were living in the final moments of Earth's history. This movement became known as Millerism. As the expected year approached, the excitement was palpable. Followers known as Millerites sold their possessions, left their jobs, and spread the message with urgent zeal. They published charts, pamphlets, and newspapers, all pointing to the imminent return of their Savior. The period between 1843 and 1844 came and went, however, and Jesus did not appear. This led to a period of confusion, but a follower of Miller named Samuel Snow offered a new calculation. He pointed to October 22, 1844, as the true date, aligning it with the Jewish Day of Atonement. The belief in this new date became even more intense. October 22, 1844 was the day. Believers gathered in homes and fields, watching the skies, waiting in joyful expectation. But as the sun set and the day passed into night, their hopes were dashed. Christ had not come. The following day was filled with profound sorrow and confusion. This event would forever be known in Adventist history as the Great Disappointment. You might think this would be the end of the story, a failed prophecy, a scattered movement. But for a small, resilient group, the Great Disappointment was not an end, but a beginning. They refused to believe their entire experience had been a mistake. They went back to their Bibles, praying and studying with even greater intensity, determined to understand what had gone wrong. They came to a new understanding. They concluded that William Miller was right about the date October 22, 1844, but wrong about the event. The prophecy in Daniel didn't refer to Christ's return to earth, but to a different event entirely. They believed it marked the beginning of Christ's final phase of ministry in the heavenly sanctuary, a sort of investigative judgment before his eventual return. This reinterpretation of the 1844 prophecy became a foundational pillar for the group that would eventually formed the Seventh-day Adventist Church. But another key piece of the puzzle was still falling into place. Around this same time, a small group of Millerites, influenced by a Seventh-day Baptist woman named Rachel Oakes Preston, began to study the biblical Sabbath. They came to the conclusion that the fourth commandment, to keep the seventh day, Saturday, holy, was still binding for Christians. This was a radical idea at a time when virtually all of Christianity observed Sunday as the day of worship. One of the key figures in uniting these two major ideas, the sanctuary doctrine and the seventh-day Sabbath, was Joseph Bache, a retired sea captain and a prominent Millerite leader. Bache was a man of action and deep conviction. He wrote a 48-page pamphlet in 1846 making the biblical case for the seventh-day Sabbath, and he tirelessly traveled to share this message with the scattered groups of post-disappointment believers. Now, let's introduce two other crucial figures in this emerging movement, James and Ellen White. James White was a dynamic Millerite preacher and a gifted organizer. Ellen Harmon, who would later marry James, was a young woman who, following the Great Disappointment, began to experience powerful visions. The believers came to see her visions as a manifestation of the gift of prophecy, providing guidance, encouragement, and clarification as they navigated this new theological territory. Together, James, Ellen, and Joseph Bates became the pioneers of the Sabbatarian Adventist movement. They didn't have a formal church or a headquarters. They were a small, scattered band of believers, often poor and facing ridicule, but they had a powerful sense of mission. Starting in the late 1840s, they began holding what they called Sabbath conferences. These were meetings where they would gather for days at a time to study the Bible, pray, and hammer out their core beliefs. It was through this intensive collaborative study that their distinct doctrines began to take shape. Communication was key to their growth. In 1849, James White felt compelled to start a small paper. With barely any money, he began publishing The Present Truth, which later became the Advent Review and Sabbath Herald. This publication became the lifeline of the movement, connecting believers across the country and unifying them in their understanding of Scripture. It was through these printed pages that their beliefs about the Sabbath, the state of the dead, the heavenly sanctuary, and the soon return of Christ were shared and solidified. The 1850s were a decade of growth and organization. The believers, who had initially been wary of creating any formal church structure after their experience with established denominations, began to see the need for it. They needed a way to own property, pay ministers, and coordinate their rapidly expanding mission work. In 1860, they took a significant step by choosing a name. After much discussion, they settled on Seventh-day Adventist. Seventh-day highlighted their belief in the seventh-day Sabbath, and Adventist signaled their continuing faith in the soon or advent of Jesus Christ. This was a pivotal moment. Having a name gave them a clear identity. 3 years later, in May 1863, delegates from various states gathered in Battle Creek, Michigan, and officially organized the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, with John Byington elected as its first president. The small, scattered movement was now a formally organized denomination, with about 3,500 members and 30 ministers. Battle Creek, Michigan became the early nerve center of the church. It was home to their publishing house and, soon, to another major institution that would define Adventism, the Western Health Reform Institute. The church's emphasis on health was largely prompted by the visions of Ellen White, who began to receive instruction on the importance of a healthy lifestyle, proper diet, exercise, fresh air, and trust in divine power. In 1866, the Health Institute opened, later becoming the world-famous Battle Creek Sanitarium, under the leadership of Dr. John Harvey Kellogg. This focus on holistic health caring for the body, mind, and spirit became a distinctive and enduring feature of Adventism. As the church grew in America, its vision expanded globally. In 1874, the church sent its first official overseas missionary, J. N. Andrews, to Switzerland. This marked the beginning of a worldwide missionary program that would see the Adventist message spread to every continent by the turn of the century. From a small band of disappointed believers in New England, the movement had grown into a global family, establishing schools, hospitals, and publishing houses around the world. By the end of the 19th century, the Seventh-day Adventist Church had firmly established its identity. It was built on the foundation of the 1844 experience, centered on the seventh-day Sabbath, guided by what they believed to be the prophetic ministry of Ellen White, and characterized by a commitment to health, education, and global mission. The journey through the 19th century was one of transformation. From the ashes of the Great Disappointment rose a structured, vibrant, and mission-driven global church, ready to face the challenges of the 20th century. It's a powerful reminder of how belief, community, and a sense of purpose can turn profound disappointment into a worldwide movement. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this history interesting, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into faith and history. See you next time. Preparing for even more complex challenges that would arise at the end of the century. Would you like me to continue to the next section? In the 1870s, daily life in the United States was undergoing gradual but profound transformations. Railroads connected previously isolated regions, industrial cities grew around textile and steel mills, and the pace of work began to diverge from the traditional agricultural rhythm. For many urban workers, Saturday no longer represented just the end of a week in the fields, but part of a rigid calendar imposed by factory whistles and formal contracts. In this environment, any religious practice that directly interfered with the work routine became more visible and often problematic. For Seventh-day Adventists who had officially consolidated their organization in 1863, Sabbath observance remained a central element of their identity. In cities like Battle Creek, Michigan, where the young denomination established its main publishing house, and later medical institutions, the Adventist presence was more tolerated due to the growing number of members and the economic contribution they represented. Still, outside these centers, the experience was different. In communities in the Midwest and South, Adventist workers often faced the choice between keeping their jobs or preserving their Sabbath observance. Industrialization did not allow for religious flexibility. Administrative records and letters preserved in denominational archives indicate that some workers requested schedule adjustments, offering to work on Sundays in exchange for Saturdays off. In many cases, the answer was negative. Business logic prioritized uniformity and collective discipline. Refusal to attend work on Saturday could be interpreted as insubordination. In the countryside, the situation was not necessarily simpler. Municipal markets and agricultural fairs often took place on Saturdays. For small farmers, missing that day meant reduced sales opportunities and commercial contact. Some chose to trade on alternative days or travel greater distances in search of buyers willing to adapt their schedules. This choice implied additional costs, both financial and physical. The issue of Sunday laws remained. Although they varied from state to state, these laws restricted commercial and recreational activities on Sundays. For most Protestants, it was about preserving the sacred character of the day. For Adventists, it created a legal dilemma. Closing on Sundays and Saturdays could make business unviable. Opening on Sundays, after observing the Sabbath, exposed them to fines and public disapproval. In some court records from the 1880s, Sabbatarian merchants were formally accused of violating Sunday statutes by keeping their stores open on the first day of the week. During this period, the denomination began to articulate a public defense of religious freedom. The creation of the International Religious Liberty Association in the late 1880s reflected an attempt to engage with legislators and present legal arguments against the imposition of specific religious observances. The actions of leaders such as Alonzo T. Jones and other editors of the American Sentinel magazine inserted the small Adventist group into broader national debates about the separation of church and state. Meanwhile, the internal life of Adventist communities remained marked by simplicity and discipline. Meetings took place in modest buildings, often constructed through the voluntary efforts of the members themselves. Parish schools began to emerge, seeking to offer education aligned with the group's convictions and avoid frequent conflicts in public schools, where Sabbath activities or assessments scheduled for Saturday created tension for Adventist students. Teachers needed to negotiate with local school boards to justify recurring absences. Ellen G. White's presence in this context was again recorded in letters and manuscripts that circulated among congregations. Her writings mention administrative debates, financial difficulties, and the need for more efficient organization. Read today as historical documents. These texts reveal a practical concern with institutional sustainability, far from any romantic idealization of the period. She describes trips to regions where groups were small and faced open opposition from neighbors or local authorities. The late 1880s brought episodes that amplified the feeling of vulnerability. In southern states, especially Tennessee, Adventists were arrested for working on Sundays, even after observing the Sabbath. One of the most cited cases in denominational records involves the Adventist minister John Harvey Kellogg, although the most emblematic episode was that of other lay members who spent days or weeks detained for failing to pay fines related to violating Sunday laws. These events were widely reported in the Adventist press, not as heroic narratives but as evidence of an unfavorable legal environment. At the same time, institutional growth continued. The Battle Creek Sanitarium, under the direction of John Harvey Kellogg, gained a reputation beyond Adventist circles, serving patients from diverse religious and social backgrounds. This public visibility helped soften negative perceptions in some sectors, presenting Adventists as contributors to public health and education. Still, acceptance was gradual and uneven. In daily life, being a Seventh-day Adventist at the end of the 19th century meant living in constant negotiation with the surrounding society. It wasn't about complete isolation, but a delicate balance between personal conviction and pragmatic adaptation. Families carefully organized their schedules, planning shopping and social activities to avoid conflict. Children learned from an early age to explain their absence from school events held on Saturdays. As the century drew to a close, Adventism was no longer a small, unknown group, but neither had it achieved full social. Imagine a time in America when going to work on a Sunday could get you arrested. Not in some distant ancient past, but right here in the United States, in the late 1800s, this wasn't just a social taboo, it was the law. And for one growing religious group, the Seventh-day Adventists, this presented a profound crisis of faith and freedom. This is the story of their struggle, a forgotten chapter in the fight for religious liberty. In the decades following the Civil War, America was a nation grappling with its identity. Amidst rapid industrialization and social change, a powerful movement emerged, determined to protect the Christian character of the nation. At the heart of this movement were the Sunday laws, or blue laws, statutes that mandated a day of rest on Sunday. For most of Protestant America, this was a welcome reinforcement of their religious and cultural norms. But what if your Sabbath wasn't on Sunday? For Seventh-day Adventists, this was a fundamental dilemma. Their beliefs, rooted in a literal interpretation of the Bible, led them to observe the Sabbath on the seventh day, Saturday, from Friday sunset to Saturday sunset. They honored this day with rest, worship, and family, just as the commandment prescribed. But when Monday morning came, they returned to their fields and workshops, ready to work. The problem was their work week included Sunday, a day the Lord demanded they keep holy. This set the stage for a dramatic conflict. Adventists weren't trying to be defiant. They were simply living out their faith. An Adventist farmer would rest and worship on Saturday. Then on Sunday, he would go out to plow his field, believing he was honoring God by providing for his family. But his neighbors might see this as a flagrant violation of the Lord's day and a threat to the community as moral fabric. Soon, what began as neighborly disapproval escalated into legal action. Across the country, but particularly in states like Arkansas, Tennessee, and Maryland, Adventists began to be arrested. Men were fined, jailed, and sentenced to hard labor on chain gangs, all for the crime of quietly working on their own property on a Sunday. Imagine being locked away for mending a fence or harvesting your crops. These weren't hardened criminals. They were devout, hard-working citizens caught between the law of the land and what they believed to be the law of God. One of the most famous cases was that of R.M. King, a farmer in Tennessee. He was repeatedly arrested for doing farm work on Sunday after observing his Saturday Sabbath. His case and many others like it drew national attention. The Adventists weren't just passively accepting their fate. They began to organize, using the press and the legal system to fight back. Their publications like the American Sentinel became powerful voices for religious freedom, arguing that the government had no right to legislate worship. They argued that forcing Sunday observance was a violation of the First Amendment as principle of separation of church and state. They saw it as the government endorsing one specific religious doctrine over others. Their defense wasn't just about their right to work on Sunday. It was about the fundamental right of every individual to worship or not worship according to their own conscience, free from government coercion. This was a radical idea for many at the time. The movement for national Sunday legislation gained serious momentum in 1888 with the introduction of the Blair Bill in the U.S. Senate. This proposed federal law aimed to promote the observance of the Lord's Day across the nation. For Adventists, this was the ultimate threat. A national Sunday law would turn their local struggles into a nationwide persecution. In response, Adventist leaders like Alonzo T. Jones took their case directly to Congress. Jones, a brilliant speaker and scholar, delivered a powerful testimony before a Senate committee. He argued passionately that such a law was not only unconstitutional but was a step back towards the religious intolerance that many of America's founders had fled. He dissected the history of religious legislation, showing how it inevitably led to oppression. His arguments were so compelling that they played a significant role in the eventual defeat of the Blair Bill. This victory in Congress was a major turning point, but the battles in local courts continued for years. However, the public debate had shifted. The passionate defense mounted by the Adventists and their allies had forced many Americans to reconsider the relationship between government and religion. They had successfully framed the issue not as one of Sabbath breaking, but as one of fundamental civil rights and religious liberty. The struggle of the Seventh-day Adventists in the late 19th century is more than just a historical footnote. It is a powerful reminder that the freedoms we often take for granted were won through courageous conviction and tireless effort. They faced down social pressure, legal threats, and imprisonment, not for personal gain, but for a principle that in a truly free society, the conscience must remain beyond the reach of the state. This story is a vital part of the ongoing American experiment, a testament to the enduring power of faith and the unending fight for liberty for all. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into the hidden histories that have shaped our world. See you next time. Organized national persecution, but there were dismissals, fines, local arrests, and real social attrition. In small communities, keeping the Sabbath could cost one's reputation and livelihood. Adventist identity was shaped in this environment of distrust, where every religious decision had a direct impact on daily life. Over time, institutional organization, public participation, and educational growth reduced some of these tensions. Even so, the memory of that period remained a historical reference point for the continued defense of religious freedom. What today seems like stability was born from decades marked by discrete choices, made under concrete and persistent risk.